My name is Jack Heller. I'm the father of Tuvia, Adam, Douglas, and Kathy. My earliest and the husband of Myra Heller. My earliest recollections is living in Brooklyn when I was about 3 years old. My father rented a second floor apartment which had 3 bedrooms, a dining room, and a living room, and a kitchen. In that apartment lived my father and mother in one of the bedrooms, my Aunt Sylvie, who was the sister of my mother, and my mother's mother, and my sister Janice lived in the 3rd bedroom. When my grandmother only spoke Yiddish, and when my mother and father would go out in the evening, and my aunt would go out in the evening, my grandmother babysat for her. My sister, who was only 1 year old at this time, would go to sleep before my parents and aunt left. And my grandmother, who only spoke Yiddish, taught me to play two-handed pinochle. And she used to entertain me.
How old were you?
I was 4. My sister was 1 and a half. My aunt was courted by Morris Bernstein, who eventually married her. One of the things I remember is when my aunt and my uncle-to-be went to rent an apartment on Ocean Avenue. And I remember him saying to his aunt, well, we like this apartment, and he spoke to the agent. The agent said it's $62 a month, and my uncle said 60, and they compromised the rental of $61 a month. And this was a 2-bedroom apartment with an elevator, and they were on the 3rd floor. After that, my father bought a house a block from where we lived on 23rd Street in Brooklyn. And that was the house that I was really brought up in. Was by the time he bought the house, I was already 5. My grandmother had already passed away, and my aunt Sylvie had married and moved about 5 blocks away from us near Ocean Parkway. I remember early time going to school, and I had to walk 2 blocks. The school I went to was PS 206, which unfortunately is not in existence anymore. It was became very old, it was torn down, and there are now apartment houses on that area. I remember having a friend who would like to walk with me to about 3 blocks towards Sheepshead Bay, and it was all open fields. There were no buildings then. And we used to catch toads and bring them back. My father made a little cage that we put the toads in. Another and of course, we would go to school in the morning. In the afternoon, we were free. The school was only from 9 to 12 then. Earliest trip I remember taking with my friend. One day we were giving my mother a hard time in the summer when there was no school. And she said, all right, here's a quarter. Go to someplace and do something. So my friend said, we can go to the Museum of Natural History. I went there. So we had a quarter. We walked to the subway, which was about 10 blocks away. The Avenue U subway, the BMT, Brooklyn Manhattan Transit then. And we took, for a nickel, we could take a ride, and we rode to 14th Street, where there was a way to walk through a tunnel past the Long Island Railroad station part of the tunnel, and get to the Independent subway and take the A train, the famous A train that Duke Ellington wrote a composition about. And we went on the train to 81st Street Natural History Museum stop. We got out of the subway and you walked right into the museum. And I was amazed. There was a big open cavernous entrance, and on one end were two Watusi warriors looking across the entrance hall to the diagonal opposite, which was maybe 80 feet or 100 feet long, and there were two lions. The Watusi were famous for hunting lions. That's why the lions never attack tall people, because it's built into their genes that they were always attacked by the Watusi warriors. Anyway, we walked in and we saw the North American animals, and I remember seeing the grizzly bear in an exhibition standing on his hind legs and was 12 feet tall. And here I was 4 feet, so you can imagine looking up and seeing what it was like. Then we went into another exhibit of birds, stuffed birds, and I got very interested in the birds then. Then my friend said, let's go have lunch. So I had 20 cents. So for 15 cents, for 10 cents, I got a cheese sandwich, and 5 cents, a small container of milk, which was enough for me. And I still had 1 nickel left to get home with. Anyway, after lunch, we went and looked at the gems. They had a famous gem collection. Yeah. Then we finally decided to go home, and this was already about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So we went on the subway back to 14th Street, walked through the tunnel to the BMT, and went to Avenue U, and then we walked out, and my friend who lived 2 blocks away went home, and I kept going and went home. So that was my first museum that I ever went to when I was 10 years old. Then I remember graduating from elementary school, and I went to high school. And the high school was...
No, junior high school.
Well, junior high school and high school were combined. I went to junior high school with Lenin. It was really high school. They didn't have a junior high school then. After 8 years in elementary school, you went to high school. But the high school was so overcrowded that I went to an annex in the Avenue R Temple building, community center, which was rented, and I would go from 6 from 12 in the afternoon, 1 o'clock to 6 o'clock, because they had 2 sessions. It was so crowded. And in the morning, I used to play with my neighbor next door chess, and we learned to do chess, learned to play chess, and that kept us busy. Finally, I got up to high school after the annex, and I had split session for the first 2 years. I was now already 14, so from 14 to 16, I still went to school from 1 to 6. Then, when I got into the third section of high school, I started to go to school 8 in the morning to noon. And that's how I learned to be an early riser. I had to get up at 7 o'clock, take a shower, and dress myself, and then have a quick breakfast, and then walk to school. And the school now was further than the junior high. It was on Kings Highway at 25th Street. In school, I became interested in mathematics and physics, chemistry and science. And I did very well in all the Regents exams, except for chemistry, which when the teacher announced the grades, he said, "You didn't do so good." I only got a 99 out of 100. But I also enjoyed swimming. They had a swimming pool, and they had a swimming team. And I swam on the swimming team 2 times a week in the afternoon. We would practice, and I was a backstroke champion. I got into the state finals, but I wasn't strong enough to win the thing. I came in only 4th. So I didn't score to move up to higher things. I finally, the other things I remember in high school, so I was very interested in geometry and physics, and I was reading about non-Euclidean geometries and the special theory of relativity, which I more or less understood. I then graduated, and for a year I worked in my Uncle Murray's factory, brazier factory. Well, he was the one who married my mother's sister, Sylvia, which I talked about before. Then,
You mentioned before that you knew your mother's mother, and she taught you how to play
pinochle.
double
No, pinochle.
pinochle.
That's all.
And did
Two-handed.
you know your mother's father?
No,
Your
he wasn't
grandfather?
living.
And did you know your father's?
My father's father, his wife died. That was my father's mother, and he remarried, and so he looked much younger than he was, and he didn't want the woman he married to know that he had grown children and how old he was. So we rarely saw him. The only time I saw him was at my wedding with Myra. He came to the wedding. And then when the next time I saw him, which was about 3 years later, he was already about 95. So on a hot day, we had a pigeon a bend in our house for Tuvia. And he walked all the way from Avenue Station to our house, which is 11 blocks, on this blistering hot day. It must have been 90 degrees out. And I met him, and he saw his great-grandson, his first great-grandson, and that was the last time I saw him. He died a few years after, but we rarely saw him. Getting back, I graduated high school, and I went to, I worked for a year in the brassiere factory, which was uneventful, but it was nice of my uncle to give me a job. But I told my father I wanted to go to college, and I went to an engineering college called Brooklyn Polytechnic Institute, which is still in existence.
Brooklyn College.
No,
John.
no, let's forget about that. Shut up. Then I went to school, and I studied physics. First, I studied aeronautical engineering, and that was during the beginnings of the war, Second World War. I wanted to go and enlist. My father said, instead of being drafted and being put in whatever they give you, why don't you apply for the Air Force as a technician? So I did, and I went down and I applied, and I went through the exam perfectly. And the last part of the exam, they look and they see I have a polynoidal cyst, which was all right. So the person said, the recruiter said, we want someone like you. We need people with the ability to fix things. So, and he said, get an operation or get repaired, and you can apply again and we'll take you. So I got the operation, it healed. I went down for the exam again, and during the operation, the exam, the cyst opened and started to drain. So they gave me 4F, and that's probably the reason why I'm here, because many of the people who were drafted at that time were in the Battle of Bulge and were killed. During the Second World War, I was home with Myra. We had already met Donald and Dick. Dick was my best man at the wedding.
How did you know them?
I knew them, as Myra said, through Phyllis, who wrote to Dick, who was in the North African Army. He was in the army in North Africa. And he wrote back to Phyllis and said, I have two friends, and I'd like to be able to have them meet someone. So Phyllis had a sister, Laney, who got to go out with Donald and eventually married Donald. I got to go out with Myra and eventually married Myra. After the war was over, I got a job at Princeton University working on a weapons project, the hydrogen bomb. And when that project was finished at...
Project Matterhorn?
No, it was after that. The Project Matterhorn was the atomic bomb. This was the hydrogen bomb. And I did the calculations, since I knew how to use computers. I did a lot of the calculations for the bomb. An interesting side issue is we took a pool when they were going to blow up the first bomb of how big it would be. And the calculations indicated it would be about 6 megatons, which is about 60 times as big as the Hiroshima bomb. And so we drew lots, 3.5, we drew out. But I said, it may not go off, so we ought to have a zero choice. And it may go off much bigger than we thought, so we ought to have an infinite choice. But when they set off the explosion and test, it was bigger than any of our calculations. So the one who had the infinite won the pool. We all put $1 in on the pool.
And where was that exploded?
It was exploded in Eniwetok in the East Indies, in the Pacific. It blew up the island it was on and 2 neighboring islands within a half a mile of them. Then, after the project was over, I went to
Did
work.
you ever meet Einstein?
After the project was over, I got hired by NYU, who had a big grant from the Atomic Energy Commission and had a very large UNIVAC machine, which took up a room 20 by 30 feet. And it's less powerful than the little machines that sit on your desk now. And we did calculations on reactors, because people were getting interested in using reactors for generating electricity instead of using coal and oil. While I was there, Edward Teller, who was a physicist that was instrumental in building the hydrogen bomb, wanted to hire people. When he heard of me, he wanted me to go to Berkeley, the radiation lab, and do calculations there for them.
Berkeley, California?
Yes, in Berkeley, California. And Myra didn't want to go, which was a good thing, so I stayed on at NYU. At NYU, I became, they had a satellite computer uptown in the Bronx, in their uptown campus, and I became director of that computing center. And I was there for about 3 years, and then I heard about Stony Brook. I was also put on the faculty of applied mathematics at NYU. And then I heard about an opportunity in Stony Brook, and it was much better than just being a director of a computing center. It would give me a chance to do research in mathematics that I wanted to do. So I applied to Stony Brook and I got a position there. I gave a talk, they liked me, they made me an offer, and then I negotiated for a little more, and they sort of met my offer. And we moved out there. Myra didn't want to move out. She said it's too far. But we moved out and we made friends. We also kept up our friends who were in Englewood by joining certain theater groups and seeing theaters, because if we scheduled a theater, we'd have to get together. And I would drive 60 miles to New York. They drove 20 miles to the theater from Englewood. And we would have dinner and then go to the theater. So it was a nice way to keep up with everyone. We still keep up with the few that are left. This group that we formed in Englewood was called the Culture Club, spelled K and K with K's, not C's, as a pun. Anyway, as I got on in age and found it more difficult to drive 60 miles and then go to the theater and drive back 60 miles at 11 o'clock at night, we decided to move into New York, and we did. We bought an apartment in Carnegie House on 57th Street and 6th Avenue, which is right at the edge of the theater district. And when we were interviewed as to whether the co-op would accept us, they asked the question, after explaining all the details about Carnegie House, said, "Why do you want to move into Carnegie House?" And I said, "I prefer to walk to the theater than drive 60 miles to the theater." That ended the thing, and they accepted us. And we have been living here for 8 years now, enjoying it. going to museums, to concerts, to walks in the Central Park. Central Park is only 2 blocks from us. When we get out of the building, we turn left and walk there. The Museum of Modern Art is only 3 blocks from us. You turn right and we walk to the museum. The Museum of Art and Design used to be across the street from the Museum of Modern Art, but now is at Columbus Circle, which is about 5 blocks from us. So we still have a lot of things in common. We've made a lot of friends at Carnegie House, and we see them every so often, and we're enjoying our life here, and we expect to have many more years here.